for think tanks, you could say that a 100 days yardstick is an excellent opportunity to take stock. To what extent has President Biden been able to live up to his promise of restoring the transatlantic relationship, climate, tax, COVID, defense? Where do we already see clouds on the horizons? On the horizon, China, Nord Stream 2, Buy American clauses. And what does the European public actually sort of expect from the new US administration? While I was preparing for this conversation, I was reading an interview by Henry Kissinger in the newspaper Die Welt. And no, it was not about who do you call if you want to call Europe. It was about the psychological divorce, that was his term, which has taken place between the US and Europe. As an illustration of this, well, he referred to the fact that there's basically no coverage of European politics, elections, and so forth in US media. And according to him, there's a great risk that Europe, unless it strengthens its transatlantic relationship, becomes an appendix to Asia. Over the weekend, German Defense Minister Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer said something similar. I quote, "For me, the question is not at all whether Europe will be crushed between the Americans and the Chinese. The far bigger challenge is whether Europe will have any role at all," quote unquote. So 100 days after Biden entered office, there's plenty to discuss, also from our side of the Atlantic. And to do this, we have two excellent speakers. We have the Foreign Minister of Denmark, Jeppe Kofod, who's sitting here next to me in the wonderful building, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then we have Mark Leonard joining us from London, which I'm sure is his office at home still, so Director of European Council of Foreign Relations. So let's start with you, Jeppe Kofod. What is your evaluation of the first 100 days, transatlantic relationship? America is back, but is Europe ready? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lykke, and thank you for inviting me to this very important event. I'm very excited about it, and also good to see you, Mark, again. And it's great also to see so many behind the scenes out there, and I look forward to hearing your questions, your perspective, and look forward to a good debate. Let me, from the outset, say that the US, for me, holds a special place in my heart, like in many's heart. I studied there at Harvard, I lived there, I have traveled there intensively, and American ideas, American people have inspired me always, and I think when Europe and US are together around common ideas, we can really move the world in a direction and start new chapters that could really form our future. So it is so important. This remains with me as my daily work as foreign minister here in Denmark. I firmly believe in the transatlantic relationship. The US is Denmark's closest and most important ally. American and Danish foreign policy share many traits. We both have a value-based approach that puts the citizens at the center of foreign policy. We share strong democratic values, including human rights, democracy, and freedom. And we stand up for those values within the EU and the US and around the world. There is today, I would say, a great need for our democracies to join forces to stand up for democratic values worldwide. These values are severely under pressure. That is why I commend President Biden for taking the initiative for a democracy summit, and I look forward to contributing to this very important agenda. His presidency has begun at an unprecedented time in the middle of a pandemic that urges the need for international cooperation and also global partnership. But I would say Joe Biden already delivered on his promise to revitalize international alliances and also reconfirm US international commitments. I was personally very impressed by the speech by which the US re-entered into the Paris Agreement, the World Health Organization, Human Rights Council, where Denmark serves at the moment, even renewed the New START deal with Russia within the first couple of weeks of his presidency. I think nobody have seen that speed. I believe that was so speedy, that could be done so speedy. The transatlantic relationship re-energized, and let me give you a few examples. Only 2 days after the President Biden's inauguration, I hosted a meeting with the EU foreign ministers and US climate envoy John Kerry, actually sitting in this room. It was essential for us that the US and the EU quickly got on the same page in order to pull all efforts into reaching an ambitious approach towards COP26. A huge effort was also put into the Leaders Climate Summit in April. The US showed again global leadership by announcing to reduce emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. And I was also proud that my own Prime Minister was invited as one of the 40 world leaders to showcase Danish ambitions and innovation. I'm determined to build an even stronger cooperation across the Atlantic to fight climate change, to accelerate joint action. Another area that I would like to highlight is Iran. The Biden administration is now engaged in negotiation on re-entering the Iran nuclear deal, JCPOA. A condition is that Iran recommits to their parts of the agreement. These are very positive signals. The EU is a key facilitator, and we are working relentlessly to find solutions that will keep the deal intact. And there is, of course, China, which I also want to touch here. The US and EU share the approach of seeing China both as a partner, as an economic competitor, and as a systemic rival. And in some key areas, China is an inevitable partner. The fight against climate change is one example where there is no alternative to dialogue and also cooperation and commitment. But we will at the same time always be ready to criticize China when needed. For example, on human rights violation in Hong Kong and Xinjiang, which I have repeatedly spoken out against loudly and clearly. It is, however, not enough to criticize China. The EU and US must also work hard in third countries to show that the current world order and our democracies are better than the autocratic alternative that China is offering, and that we can reform the current world order, US and Europe together, safeguarding some of the values that have been built after the Second World War. So international trade is another important issue where US and EU should join forces also in the World Trade Organization in order to tackle the challenges from China. When it comes to Russia, we must travel on the same road of dialogue, but also firm principles. We must continue to be strong proponents for the respect of human rights and supporters of an active Russian civil society. And we must continue to take prompt and coordinated measures against Russia's violation of international law, disinformation, and cyber attacks. Transatlantic cooperation is key, in my opinion, to handling the complex global challenges. However, to achieve an even stronger partnership with the US, we must also pursue a stronger EU. A EU that acts quicker and with more assertiveness on the global scene, an EU that acts stronger in our own neighborhood, assuming stronger responsibility of our own security, an EU with better sanctions instrument. Breaking rules must have consequences, not least when it comes to human rights. We should do this, in my opinion, in close coordination with Washington. A stronger EU will not be on the expense of transatlantic relationship. On the contrary, I think stronger allies means stronger alliances, and it's very important to understand that. I'm happy to sense a similar strong eagerness from my colleagues in the EU to continue strengthening our transatlantic ties. There are so many opportunities to tap into, and when the EU and US stand together with common voice, we are impossible to ignore in the world, and we can make a real change for the better. We can be rule makers and not rule takers. And that will be my initial remarks. Thank you so much, Lykke.
Thank you very much, Jeppe. Great, thank you very much. Great that I had women and technique. Thank you very much. Apologies for those who had difficulties in hearing us at the beginning. Thank you also for highlighting sort of clear sort of areas where you see sort of future strength and cooperation between the US and the EU. I'm sure there'll also be areas where we'll have sort of more conflict, and can more or less imagine that Mark will also touch upon some of those issues. And remember that you can already now use the chat and come forward with your comments and your questions. But Mark, I remember when ECFR launched its major opinion poll in the run-up to the American election, and then when it was published, that I immediately thought when I saw the results that you can take Trump out of the US, but you cannot take him out of Europe. So please elaborate on that point. What did the opinion poll actually say about the transatlantic relationship? The floor is yours, Mark.
Thank you so much, Lykke, and it's wonderful to be here with you and with the Danish Foreign Minister and with Think Tank Europa. As you say, it's quite helpful to have a baseline to evaluate the first 100 days on, and we have a baseline of what Europeans were expecting from a poll that we did just after Biden was elected. And I'm going to use some of the results of that to set the stage for how difficult the challenges were for the Biden administration when they came in. And I think that kind of helps us judge how much he's managed to achieve in his first 100 days. So I'm going to put some slides up now, which I will go through very quickly. Hopefully this is working. Oops. And basically, to sum up the poll in one sentence, I think what it shows us very clearly is that Europeans, like Joe Biden, they thought America was on the wrong track under Donald Trump. They're very happy that he won, but they're quite skeptical about his ability to bring America back as a global leader. And this poll was basically done at the end of last year, just after the elections, and is in 11 countries. And essentially, what we found, I won't show you the slides that showed how happy people were that Biden won, but that was something which was true right across Europe, east, west, north, and south. However, there were some real doubts in people's minds. The first was doubts about American politics. A majority of people felt that the American political system was broken, over 60%. You can see that's also very widely laid out. And many people were also worried that that could mean that, you know, after Biden, that you could get another Trump, literally, in some people's minds. And particularly in Germany, we saw a majority of people say that they couldn't trust the American people to vote the right way again. But there are also doubts in people's minds about American power. And we found that most people in Europe, again, about 60%, think that China is going to be more powerful than the United States in the next 10 years. And in every single country, there are more people who agreed with the statement that China will be stronger than the US than those who disagreed with it. And the third kind of thing, which I think was quite striking, is that the American security guarantee, so central to our worldview and to our idea about security over the last few decades, is no longer seen as indispensable in many places. This slide has on the left-hand side, in the kind of dark blue colors, some very, very interesting findings. Those are the people who think that we need the security guarantee a great deal, those for whom it's existential. And what you can see is that less than 1 in 5 Europeans are in that column. But particularly striking, I think, again, is what's happening in Germany. I was less shocked to see that only 1 in 10 French people thought that the US security guarantee was totally indispensable. But the fact that it's the same in Germany is very striking, and that a third of Germans almost think that we don't need it very much, or indeed at all, was quite sort of surprising. In fact, outside of Poland, no country has a very large number of people who are in that sort of existential column. So it's not that people are hostile to the US. They very much like Biden. They're pleased that he's elected, but they have doubts about America's reliability and its politics, about its power, staying power, but also about how much we need the security guarantee. And that was leading Europeans to take some quite radical policy decisions about the policy consequences. The first is quite a shock to the Biden team, because their big approach was about allies. And when they look forward at the big challenges of the 21st century, particularly the rise of China, the hope was that they could get the allies to stand shoulder to shoulder with the US. But when we asked people what they would do if there's a disagreement between the US and China, we found that a majority of people in every single country don't want to take America's side. They don't want to take China's side either, but over 60% want to stay neutral. And that's true of all countries. Denmark was the most Atlanticist of countries, where 35% wanted to take the US side, but you still have 50% who want to be neutral. What's also striking is that the results on Russia are not dissimilar. There are more people who want to take America's side against Russia, 40% in Denmark. But still, even in Denmark, more people want to stay neutral than to take the US side against Russia. The second consequence is about investing in European defense. We gave people these two options. First option is Europe can't always rely on the US. We therefore need to look after our own defense capabilities. The second option was that the US will always protect Europe, so we don't have to worry so much about our own defense capabilities. And what you can see is 2/3 of Europeans agreed with the first statement, and that is a majority in every single country that was polled. The third set of findings is also very striking. There were great hopes in the White House about a sort of economic détente and the idea of creating more of a sort of economic base amongst democratic countries. But when we ask Europeans about what we should do in terms of our economic relations with the US, only 17% think that we should be more relaxed with the US. A lot of people think that the current level's right, but even more people think that we should actually be tougher with the US. Again, that changes from country to country, but in no country is there a sort of majority that's keen to start dropping the sort of economic caution and have a kind of new détente with the United States. But the most striking finding, I think, is the last one, which is when we asked people who the 3 most important countries were to develop a relationship with. What we found is that in many European countries, the number 1 country is no longer the US of A, but is in fact Germany, or in Germany's case, it's France. So France comes as the top country, but in Denmark, in Spain, in France, in Hungary, in the Netherlands, in Portugal, what you see is more people looking to Berlin than to Washington. There are still a few countries that put the US top, the UK with 54%, Poland with 45%, and Sweden, but it's very close run thing. 36% said the US, 35% said Germany. So I think if you take all of those things together, I think in conclusion, what it means is that Biden came in with a long shadow that I think came from the Trump years, a crisis of American democracy, but also big questions about American power, people worried about aligning totally with the US. And I think what that shows is that the transatlantic relationship isn't going to snap back. It needs to be rebuilt. And that is a real challenge for us all. If you look at the first 100 days, you can see that there's been a huge amount of energy there. But I think what we need to do is to see how you can rebuild a relationship in a more equal way, with Europeans taking on more responsibility, being more sovereign around new issues like China, climate change, digital, and also thinking about that transatlantic relationship from a wider picture. And I think that the meetings of the G7 at the moment and relations with other democracies is, I think, a good example of the fact that we can't simply see this as a sort of bilateral relationship, but we need to look at it in a changing geopolitical world. I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So basically, one of the core points here is that the transatlantic relationship has to be rebuilt, that it's not enough just to have another president sort of elected. So that leads to my first question to you, Jeppe, and remember, you can use the chat to raise your questions. What will be the special Danish contribution to this overall process of rebuilding the transatlantic relationship? Where can Denmark and maybe also Nordic countries truly contribute to this process?
Well, thank you. I think it's a very important question. And I think that if you look at the US now, also after the election, but also up to the election, it's clear that the US has come into the new presidency, the new administration, very split with itself, polarized, with big issues domestically, And for example, also with the pandemic and the economic consequences, how the US can be rebuilt, grow the economy again, ensure development of new jobs for the middle class and all of that. I think there is an opportunity for Denmark and Scandinavian countries to join forces with the Biden administration, with the policy agenda that they have. And it also comes with the green transformation. I mean, if you look at the program that Biden administration has put forward, the infrastructure that they want to modernize in the US, we can really come in here with good examples of public-private partnership models where we can, invest in energy transformation, but also wider. So I think so. On the economic side, I think we have it. On foreign policy and security side, I think you'll see that Denmark, in particular, we are very engaged in the world. So if you take the 3 C's in NATO, cash, capabilities, and also contributions, Denmark is very much on capabilities and contributions, and we are now leading, for example, the NATO's mission in Iraq to stabilize Iraq against Daesh, and we are very active also with the US Kingdom of Denmark on the Arctic issue. So I think we would be a good partner for the US. We also encourage US. Denmark is currently a member of the Human Rights Council to be active again there, and it was big news and good news that US was candidating again to the Human Rights Council. So I think Denmark's role is to strengthen the bilateral cooperation around issues where the US need to find domestic solutions to really big problems at home, but also in the world scene want to bring US back in international institutions as a strong partner. I will also mention the World Trade Organization, where we agree that we need to reform it to ensure that China, the state-run economy that they are, that it can be dealt with more effectively. We share the US interest in ensuring that China play by the rules, and therefore we need to reform and strengthen World Trade Organization, and there Denmark's role is also to bring them in. So I see it as both bilaterally but also internationally as Denmark's role as a strong transatlantic country that always stand up for the values, but also do it when it's hard in international missions. That there we will see that we US have a friend, but we expect US to come back on that. On climate, just briefly, and then we'll stop. I invited, as I said, 2 days after the inauguration, John Kerry to this meeting with EU foreign ministers, and there I think Denmark play a particular role because we need to do this transformation of our economies to meet the Paris goals in a socially just way, and also a way where we build an economy where we also create jobs. And I think there Denmark can give the US something more particular.
Thank you very much. Many questions. A lot of them focus upon the EU-US-China triangle, to use that expression. We have a question here from Jennifer Tolman. What are the opportunities of the June EU-US summit to solidify cooperation and regular dialogue formats, i.e. on China, but also on climate? So basically, do we also need sort of new institutions looking upon our relationship between the EU and the US? And follow up, is the EU-US summit also an EU27 moment? Would you like to start us off on the discussion, Mark, with regards to the relationship EU, China, and the US?
I think that I'm not sure if we need new institutional formats, but I think that the EU is an indispensable part of the transatlantic approach towards China. And I think that does show how much the world is changing. NATO might have been the right format to think about the challenge from the Soviet Union and terrorism in Afghanistan and other places. But when it comes to the challenges of China, whether it's about regulating technology, whether it's about dealing with the sort of weaponization of globalization, whether it's about dealing with the sort of challenges of the Belt and Road Initiative, I think most people in America realize that actually the European Union is a really big player on a lot of those different fields, and that they have to find a way not just of engaging with the member states and the big member states and with the kind of traditional security ministries that have had a very long-term exposure to the US, but that actually the critical discussions are going to be more in these areas which cut across foreign and domestic policy, where the EU is very, very involved, whether it's climate, technology, different parts of trading relationship, competition policy. And that is an area where we don't have the same sort of ability to reconcile strategy and geopolitics with policy. From a European perspective, these things have traditionally been in separate baskets. And now we're having to work out how we can preserve a rule-based order, how we can stand up for the sort of open world that we believe in, whilst at the same time not being naive about the geopolitical challenges. And I think the biggest institutional challenges are actually more on the European side, but we need to start developing both the right kind of mindset, but also a way of actually thinking strategically in these areas rather than treating them just as technical issues. And once we've done that, then we can be a much more effective partner with the US.
Thank you very much. What are your comments now we look upon the relationship US, China, and the EU? Josep Borrell, I think it was last year, he said the following: we don't have to choose between the US and China. Some people would like to push us to choose, but we don't have to choose. It has to be like Frank Sinatra's My Way. Is that a tune you can recognize? Is that what's happening? Or are we sort of being pushed into choosing between the US and the EU, so to speak?
So I think, well, that decision is very clear when it comes to values and rules. We are a partner with the US. We are allies. We are the ones who built the type of world order that we see now. And in that sense, US is the most important ally, and also more important than any other ally. So there, I think we should look at this strategically and try to re-engage in a transatlantic, more structural dialogue around issues. Mark alluded to it, the tech issue, technology issue, very important. This is something that cross-cutting foreign policy, domestic policy, people's freedoms and personal lives. This is something where we both in Europe and in the US are struggling how to deal with technology. How do we regulate big platforms, content, for example? How do we avoid polarization or disinformation that could eventually destroy our democracies and the values that we hold dear? So there, for example, I think it's really important with a structural dialogue around these issues. How do we regulate? Well knowing we come from maybe different regulatory paradigms, but still, when it comes to personal data, we have legislation in Europe that took years to develop, but something that is replicated around the world, also in the US and some states. So I think we need to look at this. Climate was mentioned. I think Europe needs to stand up more on what I call climate diplomacy, our external dimension on our climate agenda. I always advocate that in the Council of Foreign Ministers, because we need to step up. Borrell and others, we all need to step up here. I think US has done it. The Leaders Summit they just had, one example, but also the commitments now and national contributions to the Paris Accord is very encouraging. Because if we wanted to have a successful COP26, we need to raise ambitions now and not too late up to COP26. And then when it comes to China more, which was the question, I think we have to recognize, as I also said, that the idea that we see China and our two systems, the Chinese and that type of system, vis-a-vis, I would call it the Western system, as rivalries. I think it is a fact. And there we need to, if we need to be the rule makers in this world, we need to join forces. Europe cannot make it alone. US cannot make it alone, but together we can. And also with Asian countries, we can, in a strategic way, form rules that reflect transparency, rule-based order, open societies, when it comes to trade, rules in World Trade Organization that respects fair competition. So this is what we need to do, and I think the appetite from the Biden administration is huge. So it's also for us Europeans to step up a little bit more. Then my dream will be that we reinvent the old TTIP discussion format on a trade and investment partnership. But I recognize that timing has to be right for that. But in the longer term, we should go there, because that is, I think, the only way in the longer term we can write the rules of international trade and investment for the future.
It's always good to have dreams. Mark, Adam Jaser asks, basically follows up on the China question here. Does Europe have a choice really on whether to cooperate with US on China, given that the EU is no longer able to enforce its rule book in the world? So basically the overall question about strategic autonomy. And a follow-up, you could say, more or less in the same direction by Heinz Gärtner coming from Vienna. Maybe it's more comment, but is it not rational for Europeans to stay neutral in the case of a military conflict between the US and China? Mark, over to you.
Well, I think we obviously want to cooperate with the US as much as we can. We have very, very close interests in lots of different areas. We have a similar assessment of challenges from the Chinese model of political economy, and are obviously very nervous about some of the political developments within China. But at the same time, I think the important thing is for Europeans to organize themselves to work out what our interests are. Our interests aren't always going to totally overlap with American interests, and we should work together wherever we can. We should try and shape Chinese choices so that it becomes more attractive for China to develop in ways that are in line with our vision for the global economy, but also for dealing problems with climate change. I think we're more likely to be able to do that if we work with the US in close cooperation, as well as within other powers. But we also have to be willing to hold our ground where our interests don't completely overlap. And I think there are areas, particularly when it comes to military and security issues, where it's not just about our relationship with the US, but our relationship with other democracies, which we need to work on. We're about to have an EU-India summit. We're also talking to the Japanese and to other players. And part of growing up in this world and becoming more sovereign is starting to have a wider set of relationships, and to be a bit more willing to take responsibility for things that are going on in the world, because Europeans are the #1 trading partner to a lot of countries in Asia, but we haven't really had much of a tradition of talking to them about political issues, about geopolitical issues, about the kind of rule-based order. And I think that if we want the rules to be upheld, then we do need to get much deeper relationships. For example, on tech policy, if we can have 1 billion Indian consumers as part of the regulatory environment that we're trying to build, it's much more likely to last and to kind of move forward. And I think that's what's driven some quite rapid changes in our relationships with countries like India and Japan, with whom we didn't traditionally have much of a relationship apart from our economic ones.
Thank you very much. Time is almost running out. COVID, we haven't really touched upon that yet. I mean, look upon the transatlantic relationship. Just read last night in German Spiegel that, well, we have problems also in Denmark in being able then to have vaccines called CureVac, because challenges with America, they're not being willing to export certain sort of ingredients that we need for vaccines. How do both of you sort of see the transatlantic relationship in the light of the COVID crisis? Do you see any chances there of having global leadership in that overall crisis? Because so far there hasn't even been sort of an attempt to have a global solution with regards to the vaccines.
Well, that is a very important question, because, well, if I may start another place, when you live in a democracy, like we do, US and Denmark and in Europe, most countries in Europe. Then, of course, when we have crises like health crisis, and we see that there is now the golden key to get out of it is vaccines, then rightly our populations expect us to ensure that we will get our population vaccinated as soon as possible. That goes for the US, it goes for Europe. And they expect us to act on that. Where if you're countries that are not democratic, you have an easier way ahead if you want to use vaccines, for example, as a diplomatic weapon and grant some vaccines to we have seen that. We have seen Chinese vaccines, Russian vaccines. So there are foreign policy implications here that we need to learn from, in my opinion. We should also avoid over the Atlantic that we will create obstacles for trade of ingredients, but also PPE, equipment, and so on that is needed in a health crisis. And ideally, I think we should work in the World Trade Organization to ensure a framework around how we have principles common when we are facing health crisis. But I think what the COVID-19 crisis learned us is that we are very vulnerable in Europe and in the US, and we need to build some more resilience. We need to have a bigger part of our value chains and supply chains in order to deal with health crisis, not only in Europe, let me underline that, but also be able to, for example, produce vaccines that can be used in other countries, like the neighboring countries to EU, and also in Africa. I mean, we see that's why Denmark is pressing so hard to get vaccine production and development up, is because we think we now is behind some other geopolitical players. So I think this is where US and Europe should come together. And if there are obstacles to trade, the only thing we can be sure of is that the development of new vaccines and the production capacity will go down. I mean, if we have, in a way, a free market or integrated cooperation, we will be much faster, both individually and together. So that is where I stand in this discussion.
Final remark from you, Mark?
Yeah, no, I think I agree very much with what the minister said, and I think it's something that the whole of the rest of the world is going to be looking at. We're about to be doing some polling in some of the countries where vaccines have been available, and I suspect that we'll see there's quite a lot of damage to the reputation of Europeans and Americans from the fact that we've been so slow, and these perceptions that we haven't really engaged with the problems in other places, have been hoarding our vaccines or just not getting our act together. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I think it's not too late to change tracks, and the situation in India, I think, is leading to a kind of real wake-up call in other places.
Thank you very much. That's basically it. We don't have any time left. Thank you very much for participating, to the Minister, Jeppe Kofod, to Mark Leonard, for all of you who sort of followed this at home. Sorry about sort of the technological challenges that we had, but I think it was still an excellent sort of countdown to what starts on Sunday, because on Sunday, the conference on the future of Europe will be kicked off, you could say. Emmanuel Macron from France will give a speech, many other speeches, and I know that in Denmark, not lots of people are excited about this conference, but you could say it is actually an opportunity to debate what we just debated. I mean, what is actually our ability then to influence the world? How are we affected by COVID, by climate? How can we rebuild the transatlantic relationship? And at ECFR, Mark, we sometimes use the German term Durchschlagsfähigkeit. How can we improve the EU's Durchschlagsfähigkeit? And there, I just saw last night that there's now competition with regards to semantics, because the CDU-CSU just came out with a paper in the run-up to this conference on the future of Europe, where they say we need a Souveränitätsoffensive. So let's see what comes out of that. Without further ado, thank you very much. Thank you again to you for participating. Stay safe. Farewell from Copenhagen.